Hey everybody, Bobby Chiu here. So I got the new Vaio Z Canvas to play around with for the last few weeks, and today I figure I'd do a review and a demo. So one of the first things that I noticed with this is this little light here, and this is actually a light that's saying that the keyboard is being charged. If you take a look, this is the keyboard. Look how thin it is. It's beautiful. It has a nice mouse track that's really great. And then we have the on-off switch over here. So I'm going to set this aside. And it's really nice to be able to do portrait or landscape. Very, very helpful. But one of the cool things that I really like about this is something so simple. You see how it comes with this little thing right here for the pen. This actually clips on to the side of the computer. So far, it's been pretty secure, pretty stable. And the other thing I really like is that it comes with a second pen, which can be very useful. And this pen comes with its own grip, but they don't actually put it on, which is also very nice, depending on the kind of artist that you are or the preferences that you like. The other thing that I like here is you can see that there's a kickstand. Now this kickstand is very much like the other kinds of kickstands that you've seen. But this one, there's a nice sturdiness to it where I can actually just draw and not have to worry about pushing the screen down too much. It's firm. So far, it's been still very secure. Okay, so here's the drawing that I'm going to be painting for you guys, and it's a very simple pencil drawing, and it's in Photoshop. So let's talk about setup now. So as you can see, I have my keyboard on my left-hand side, and that's because I'm right-handed. So I'm going to be, pressing the keyboard with my left hand and drawing with my right hand. And I don't want the keyboard underneath my computer because that makes it just so complex to, type and draw at the same time. It's much more comfortable if I can just have my hands like this. And it's better ergonomically as well. Usually I would have my laptop or screen, I would have it inclined, or I would have a secondary monitor in front of me so I can stare straight ahead in front of me and draw on top of the computer. And if I need to do anything specific, then I would look down towards the computer and do anything super accurate that I need to do. For this demonstration, I'm just going to leave it flat down here because then we can see it a lot clearer on the screen. Okay, so before we do that, I want to tell you about Kyle's brushes. Absolutely awesome. What I got was the megapack, and you could go to Kyle's brushes if you're interested in grabbing the same kind of brushes that I'm using. The megapack, oh my gosh. It comes with so many brushes and so many really interesting brushes. Here's some more interesting type brushes here, and going from background color to foreground color. Then we have these bigger ones. That's a lot more painterly, isn't it? Very nice stuff. So there's actually this many brushes. Holy smokes. So what I did was I programmed a bunch of actions to hit my favorite brushes here. And let me actually program this one so that this one is going to be F5. Okay, so now I can sort through my favorite brushes in Kyle's brushes mega pack here with just using F2, F3, F4, F5. Okay, so if you don't know how to do that, perhaps I'll explain it in a second video. Yeah, let me know in the comments. Okay, so the main thing I want to show you here before we get into the painting are just all of these amazing brushes. And there's a lot of really interesting ones. For example, the watercolor type brush, which is very interesting as well. All these different types of watercolor brushes makes things really interesting. And perhaps I'll do another demo using his watercolor brushes as well. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that as well. All these different brushes, I chose my 4 favorite for this painting. And so now I can just close this. I could really close this as well, but I'm going to leave it open to see which function buttons are going to select which brush. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Ultimate Oil Soft Edge Brush. And that one looks like this. I'm going to make it nice and big. And you can see that's the oil soft edge oil painting brush here. Okay, so before I start, let's do a little setup. I'm just going to grab this layer here and get it ready to paint on. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make another copy of it, and I want to get rid of this mid-tone. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Control L because I'm on a PC, I'm going to glaze through a bunch of these details and such in this video and make it strictly much more about painting and everything, functions of the laptop. But if you subscribe to my channel, there's always new tutorials, always new tips and videos and things like that. So definitely subscribe. Now I'm going to set this layer to multiply. And why I'm setting it to multiply, well, first, so let's describe this layer, right? This layer has everything on this layer except it's much lighter. The darkest darks are still there, but the lines have become a lot lighter as well. The reason for this is because I want to have something on the top where I can retain a bunch of my lines. However, I want them to be faint because in the end, I want this to be a painting. I don't want it to be a painting with a drawing incorporated in it. In the end, I want to be able to actually turn off all of the drawing stuff, so it's just the painting underneath. Okay, so first thing is that to create another copy of the drawing, except much lighter lines. Okay, I'm going to set this to multiply. And then underneath, this is where I'm going to paint my base tone. So what I'm thinking is I'm going to make it a green background, and then the birds are going to be a nice warm color, so that way it's nice and contrasting. It'll be pleasant to look at. So I actually switched up my F2 brush to Paint Box Oil Soft Edge. It's much nicer. It has a slight bit of color variation there, so that's really nice to see. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cover the whole entire thing, and you can see with this brush there's a nice bit of texture that happens, which is great. It's something that is very helpful to kind of work with here. Now let's get into some colors, and with the colors I'm just going to vary up some tones in the background here. I'm going to put a whole bunch of darker tones just around this bird because these birds, I want them to be a nice bright tone and a very colorful contrasting tone. And because they are the focus, when I add in the darker green tone, I'm going to have brighter tones on the birds, darker greener tones in the background, and the birds are going to be a nice warm tone. This darker tone will help to emphasize the contrast and to bring out the attention of these birds even more. I do want to mix in a little bit of darker tones in other areas as well, so it fits in a little bit better. And towards the end, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the background and I'm going to blur it out a little bit so that there's a bit more atmosphere in the background. Now, the other thing that you might consider doing is actually, if you aren't using the incline option to incline your computer up a little bit, what I would suggest is either turning off your little window button here or to just flip your computer around so you don't accidentally touch that little window button all the time. It's happened to me a few times in the past, and I just didn't want to turn off the button, so I just turned the laptop around. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just pretty much done the background, but I just do want to add just a little bit of finesse to it. So there is actually a nice little splatter brush in here to just add a little flavor. It's going to enlarge it a little bit, and it's just going to add just a touch of finesse, a touch of a traditional kind of feel to it. Okay, I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to go to what's called the pocket brush. And this one is a nice solid brush that I can use to block out elements in my painting. And that's the next step, to block out elements and to give the different elements in this painting a base tone. So first element that I want to kind of block out are the birds. Now, I was already saying that I was going to use a bit of a warmer tone for the birds. So I'm going to go to a much warmer tone here and then fill in a very accurate silhouette of the birds. Now, it needs to be accurate because I'm going to be using this silhouette to kind of tell the computer where I can paint and where I can't paint, so that if I get my silhouette right, I set it to lock transparency, then whenever I try to paint, I don't have to worry about painting outside of the lines because I would have locked my transparency. But this will only work if your silhouette is tight. I'm just going to make another layer, a nice solid layer for the branch as well. Same kind of idea, except this time I'm going to choose a different tone. And how do I choose the tones that I'm going to be working with first? Well, I'm thinking about just like the majority kind of color of that tone. Now, there's no exact, right color to start with. There's many different ways to do this. But I'm just going to select something that feels good to me. Something a bit warmer. Okay, so I'm going to do another one of the leaves growing out of the branch. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock the transparency for each one of these by clicking on the lock transparency button right there. And this means that I can't paint outside of whatever's already there on that layer. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that original paint box oil soft edge brush, and I'm just going to paint over top of these, because what this brush does is it will do these slight little variations of color, of tone on the various elements here, just to give it a little bit of variation. And that's going to be really nice to work with. Instead of working off of something super clean, it's nice to kind of work off of something that's textured sometimes. It's almost like it adds some of the work that you need to do on it already, and it just makes it a lot easier to keep going, to keep painting. It's almost like it's leaving all these little happy little accidents everywhere. And through those happy little accidents, it kind of gives the paint a little bit more information. And a lot of times you can use that information to your advantage. You know, when it's too clean, sometimes it looks kind of airbrushed. It doesn't look as good. Okay, so that's the idea. Now for the next part, I'm going to make a new layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Alt and just go right in between these two layers. And when I click down, you can see that my icon, changed. And it turned into kind of like a parenting icon. So this is when you want to parent one layer to the other. So that this means that whatever I paint in this layer, it will only show up if it goes over top of the parent layer, which also means that I can just paint very freely and not have to worry about painting outside of the lines. So here we go. It's going to give a slightly warmer, redder kind of feel right in between the eyes here. I'll do the same thing on this guy over here. I also want to make sure I get those beaks in, because I'm thinking of making those a different color as well. I want to have a really nice solid color on this, so I'm going to change back to that really nice solid brush that I have here called Pocket Brush. Now I'm thinking about the rest of the bird, and I'm thinking that the rest of the bird, I do want to have like a warm color for the wings and the tail feathers as well. So let's do that. And lastly, the eyes. Let's get a nice gray tone, almost black tone for the eyes. I'm going to go with a cooler tone as well. Okay. And we could use the same tone for the feet, but in this case, I'm going to go back to the original silhouette, because that's what I really need to adjust. I need to adjust the silhouette here. Okay, now I could lock that transparency again, and now it's time to get into some details and start to make this thing look like something, because right now it doesn't look too hot, does it now? So next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a new layer, and instead of just making a normal regular layer, I'm going to go to my adjustment layers. And in adjustment layers, I'm going to go to hue and saturation, and I'm going to just turn down the darkness, or increase the darkness in this image, and I'm going to also increase the saturation and increase the darkness even more and increase the saturation even more. So it's a really nice dark version of the painting. After that, I'm going to press OK. Now, obviously, I don't want this to be everywhere. I just want this to be in selected areas. So this layer mask, how it works, if you don't know, whatever's white in my layer mask, I can see the effects of whatever the layer mask is attached to, which in this case is an adjustment layer that makes everything darker. Whatever's black in my layer mask, like if I use the color black here and I just paint in, you can see that it is like kind of cutting a hole, cutting a window in my adjustment layer, so I see what's behind it. You know, so I can use gray to just show a little bit of it. And if I don't want to see any of the effects of my adjustment layer, I just press Control I, and now everything in my layer mask is now the opposite of white, which is black, and black means that I can't see any of the effects of my adjustment layer. And if any of this stuff is confusing to you, I highly recommend just taking my digital painting course on Schoolism. It will explain a lot. Or you can take Andrew Howe's course, Fundamentals in Digital Painting. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my regular just default brush here. Okay, in this default brush, you can see it's just default spacing, 25% spacing with shape dynamics, meaning that the size of my brush is controlled by my pen pressure. I'm going to reduce the flow all the way down to 10%. I'm going to use semi-opaque paints, 40% or so. And I'm just going to go into each one of these little elements here and paint it up. Okay, so first, starting off with the birds. And just so I don't paint outside of the birds, I can go to my bird silhouette layer, hold down Control and click on it, or if you're on a Mac, then you just hold down the Command key, and every time I say Control, you would hold down the Command key, but this is for the Vaio Z Canvas. So I can also notice that there's a few little holes here in my silhouette, and I don't really want that, so let me go to my silhouette layer, unlock the transparency, turn off the selection, remember those little areas there, and I'm going to go to my original tone and just paint in these little holes here. Okay, now when I select it, I could test it out again. I could still see, yeah, there's a couple little holes there, a couple tiny little holes here. So let me just fill those in as well. Okay, and that should be good. Yep, it's good. Okay, so now I can go to my layer mask again, and let's go to that default brush again. Okay, and with the default brush, I'm going to use 10% flow, 40% opacity or so, something light, and start painting in with white. And wherever I paint in white, I'm doing what? I'm revealing the effects of this adjustment layer. And this adjustment layer does what? It makes everything darker, right? So this way I can paint in some nice shadows, and the gray will get dark gray, the red areas will get dark red, and then I can Control click on my silhouette. So I'm just selecting the bird's silhouette here, and then that means I won't paint outside of the birds. I can press Control H to hide everything. Okay, and I can start painting in some shadows. Now, when I paint in the shadows, you want to have a clear understanding of, well, where is the light coming from? Have a good idea of that, okay? And so my own kind of idea of this is that the light is coming from the upper right-hand corner and from slightly behind our characters here. Okay, so that there'll be some nice little rim lighting from behind the character a little bit, okay? I'm just going to add in a bit of shadow here. And of course, if you want to learn a little bit more about light and shadow, there's plenty of amazing Schoolism courses for that. Highly recommend Sam Nielsen's Fundamentals of Lighting, Painting with Light and Color with Daisutsumi. There's a few. Essentials of Realism with Jonathan Hardesty. And a lot of people ask, you know, which one should you take? Which one should you take? You should actually take all of them. You know, part of learning is learning how many different people do things. Not only will it give you many different options to be able to do all sorts of different things, but it will also give you much more options to create your own style, your own look. Your own style comes through knowledge, right? Style comes through knowledge and being able to stylize that knowledge into a nice, beautiful, appealing way. And there's many different ways of painting as well. This is just one of the many different ways that I go about painting something. And it's all through learning how many different ways, how many different people paint in many, many different ways. Okay, so now that I'm done the birds, time to move on to the next thing. So what's the next thing here? I'm going to make the branch the next thing. I'm going to Control click on the branch and press Control H to hide my selection so I don't get too distracted by it. And then I'm going to just paint in the shadow on the branch as well. And with this, I'm going to do some diagonal kind of marks here to kind of talk about the texture of the wood a bit more, you know, to put in a little bit of sense of grain there. Okay, very simplified, but still it can be very effective. I paint in a little bit of shadow just underneath the leaves there. That's the leaves casting a shadow onto the branch. And as well, there's going to be a bunch of shadow casted by the birds onto the branch. Can't forget that. Now we're saying that the light is coming from the upper right hand side, casting a shadow downwards. So it's going to be casting a shadow downwards towards the left. And so my shadow on the branch casted by the birds need to reflect that same direction of light. Everything must be harmonious for this to work well. And I also noticed that there's slight little gaps and my silhouette isn't perfect, so I'm just going to touch that up. Okay, so now that that's looking a little bit better, now it's time to add in a bit of light. Just going to add in a little bit of definition here to separate the two birds from each other a little bit more. So now that I'm done the dark areas, I made a new layer, and I'm going to use this layer for the light tone. Now I picked a light tone, which is, this is the ambient light coming from the blue of the sky downwards onto everything else. It's not the direct light that I'm talking about coming from the upper right hand side. This is the light coming from the sky, so it's kind of coming from all over the place, but it is coming downwards towards the earth. Okay, so I'm going to choose this color, and when I paint with this color, that's not looking too hot. That's looking really blue. And so what I can do here is in my blend mode, I can turn the blend mode of this layer to screen. And that means anything that I paint in this layer is going to act like light. Just like how anything that you paint in a multiply layer kind of acts like shadow, right? Screen is the opposite. And of course, if you want to learn more, if this is the kind of stuff that you're interested in, highly recommend taking a schoolism class like my digital painting course. Okay, I'm going to reduce by brush size now because I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking these should also reflect the texture of the feathers right now. So I'm going to use short brush strokes. You can see with each little tiny brush stroke, I lift up my brush, and you can kind of hear it clicking, clicking, clicking down. That way I have all these little brush strokes, and they overlap each other, creating a little bit of a transparency, and that's going to feel great. That's going to feel like feathers, right? Because there is this kind of overlapping of these semi-transparent feathers. And let's do the same thing on the chest here. So that's working out really nice. And you can see as I started painting the first bunch of feathers on the head there, you're probably thinking, it's not looking too hot, Bobby. But as I start painting with this tone all over the place and making it consistent everywhere, then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, that actually starts to fit in a lot more. Okay, so I'm going to just do this nice and quick and just do a nice little bit of light on these feathers here. And now these two birds are shaping out quite nicely. I'm going to redo that dabbing type motion on the top of the head here as well. Okay, I'm going to go down to the bottom now, and these bottom feathers, I'm going to just apply a little bit of that light down here as well. It's kind of like seeing through the feathers a little bit, getting a sense of translucency there. And as I look into a smaller window, you know, looking into a smaller window for me is kind of like looking at my painting from far away. And as I look into that smaller window, it's actually looking pretty good. It's feeling like the way I want it to feel. So that's good. And now let's apply this, well, let's apply this same kind of thing to the beak. And then after that, we can move on to the branch. And for the branch, we want to control-click on the branch, Control-H to hide their selection, and then we can nicely just put in a bit of that light into the branch as well. Now the shadows being casted by the birds onto the branch, that is actually blocking the light from coming from up above, you know, coming from the sky, to blocking it from landing on the branch as well in those areas. So I didn't apply the light stuff to that area. Finally, I'm gonna actually apply a bit of this onto the bird's eyes too, because you know, that's going to have a little bit of reflection from the sky as well. Okay, so at this point, you know, I've turned off my drawing layer because I don't really need it anymore, and that's something that I don't really want in the end of my painting. So I have this layer that represents all the blue from the sky, and so I've done stuff to make it lighter. Before that, I did stuff to make it darker, and so what's my next step? I'm going to make things darker again. It's just going back and forth from dark to light, getting darker and lighter as we go along. So with this round, I'm going to go really dark and really get in all those darkest areas here. Okay, so I'm going to actually use another adjustment layer instead of this floating layer. I'm going to go to hue and saturation, and then I'm going to turn down the darkness much more, saturation much more, and then I'm going to hide the whole entire thing in a layer mask. Okay, then I could just paint in white wherever I want that layer mask to disappear and for my painting to show through. Okay, so I'm using my default brush again, and this is another kind of opportunity to put in more details into, say, like the feathers or the pattern on the feathers or whatever it might be. Okay, so I put in a little bit of a pattern on these feathers right here, and of course we can command click on the birds so we stay within the silhouettes of the birds. Do some details of these feathers here as they kind of overlap each other and as the light tries to get through. I'm going to also look at these feathers here and see where do they kind of separate. Where can I kind of imagine them separating and creating just a sliver, a tiny little bit of a shadow. Because it's really in the subtleties of things where things really become believable. So these little details are super important. I don't want to put it everywhere because I want this thing to be realistic. And like I was saying, subtleties of details are super important in making things feel real. So I'm just going to stop right there, add perhaps a couple little details on this side as well. And the rest of it is going to be much more subtle. Okay, and I'm going to go on to this side as well and do the same thing. And same thing for the head. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in the direct light now. This is going to be a nice bright sunlight. So with this, let's pick the nice bright sunlight tone. Okay, so that feels pretty good. So let's apply it now to all these feathers. And now this is when we favor the stuff coming from the upper right hand side, because this is talking about the direct light that's coming down now. And again, a dabbing motion is going to help to create a little subtle tiny bit of texture because of the slight overlaps of the brush strokes here. Okay, and the light is going to be favored on the right hand side of the objects. Dabbing motion to kind of show the suggestion of feathers. Like you don't have to dab over top of each brush stroke either. You can give a little bit of space in between, and that gives you a different kind of effect. So it's always good to play around and think about the different variations you can do. What are the different choices that you can do here? You know, you can do different brush strokes, you can do different opacity, you can do all sorts of different kind of options, different flow, and see what each one does and experiment. You know, that's another huge part about finding your style. Okay, and then the light is going to come down. It's going to come down to these wings right here. So let's get on those wings. And we can have the light coming through those beautiful feathers again. And just because I was saying rim light doesn't mean that it has to be just the rim of the object. Rim light just means that light is coming from slightly behind, and the parts that we can see of the rim light is just kind of like the rim of the object for the most part. But there will be parts where the light can seep in and then you can notice it much more. So definitely don't just think of rim light as just being the rim of an object, because it's definitely not. It's much more. Zoom out a little bit more, and then we're going to do the branch. And then in the branch we could also have these slight gaps in between. Since we are kind of like in foliage, we can make any excuse we want for light to appear or disappear just because of other trees that we can't see, other leaves that we can't see. So this way I can kind of say to the audience, there's nothing interesting if you keep wandering to the left of the page, right? The light starts to disappear. What's truly interesting is the stuff that's here in the middle with these birds. And then if you go a little bit too much to the right, then you'll see that the light will disappear as well. Okay, so this is looking pretty good, and the next thing that I'm going to do is, I was saying I might just blur the background a bit to give it a bit more atmosphere, so that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to actually, just in case, I'm going to duplicate this layer, just in case I want a little bit of the details in the back. I'm going to duplicate the layer. I'm going to go up to Filter. I'm going to go to Blur and then Gaussian Blur. I like Gaussian Blur for this particular action because you can control the amount of blur that you want in the image. So that feels good. That feels good to me. That feels like there's trees in the back, lots of nice atmosphere. Okay, so last few things that I'm going to do now is I'm going to go up to the very top here. I'm going to Control A, select all, Control Shift C, which is copy everything within my selection layer, whatever we see within the selection layer, whatever combinations of layers that we see. And then when I press paste, you can see that in the icon here, it's an exact copy of everything within that selection. You can see it's like a combination of all the different layers. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to go up to Filter, okay, Blur, and then Gaussian Blur again. And this time I'm going to be blurring the whole entire image. I want to create a bit of a halo of all of these lighter areas here. Because what I want to do with this layer is I want to make it into kind of like a soft lighting for the birds underneath. And in the end, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to screen. And you can see right now, when I set it to screen, there's a bit of a halo over everything. There's soft lighting over everything. It doesn't look too hot. So I'm going to just undo that for now, because I don't want a halo around the darker areas especially. It doesn't really work like that. So I'm going to go to Control L for levels, and in levels I can see all the different values within the image. Now I want to bring all the darker values even darker, and all the lighter values, they can stay the same, or they can be, I guess they can be even lighter. So I'm going to grab this. So now all of the black values are over here and my light values are going to be like this. Okay, if I press OK, now this is really, really too saturated, too bright and everything. After this, I'm going to make an adjustment layer, okay? Just stay in there with me, and then you're just going to click on Colorize, and what Colorize does is it puts a nice hue over everything, and I'm going to use this to select the color of light around everything. Now, we were saying it's a warm, sunny day, or at least I was saying that, so I'm going to select a nice yellow kind of hue, and then I'm going to tone down the opacity of the effects of my adjustment layer here so that it doesn't become just all yellow, okay? I want to get a little bit of that original color back in there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge with the layer underneath. Now that's Control E. And now I can set it to screen, and you can see the effects of that. But I don't want this everywhere. I want it to be in selected areas. So in order to do that, I'm going to give it a layer mask. I'm going to inverse the layer mask, Control I to inverse. And now I'm going to just paint in white with a soft edge brush, right? Because this is soft lighting. So soft edge brush, painting in white into my layer mask to reveal that soft lighting effect. Okay, I'm just going to apply this in the areas where there's the most kind of light, because that's going to feel kind of overexposed a little bit, and then the camera will in turn give it a bit of that halo. Okay, so we're pretty much done, and of course there's one last step to do, which is to sign it. Okay, and that's a wrap. So that's the painting, and a couple of things I loved about it is this super simple attachment right here where you can attach the pen so you won't lose it, especially when you're traveling around, especially when you're just, sketching outdoors and you don't want to put your laptop back into your bag and then put the pen back into your bag. If you just want to carry it around and you don't want to lose everything, this clip, I think, is going to be very, very useful for me. The other thing I really liked is the keyboard. So slick, so thin, it's beautiful. It is razor thin. It's pretty awesome. Some things that I would love to see in the future is just a bigger screen, because for drawing it's always nice to have a bigger screen. Of course, not too big because you still want to keep it portable, but this is a nice size though. I do like this size. It's just that when I draw with my own sketchbook, it's just slightly bigger. So overall, I did love the size. I could have used a slightly bigger one just because I'm used to that. But I'm sure other people wouldn't really care too much because this is actually a great size to work with. So overall, big thumbs up, highly recommend it. It was actually very quick too, and I love how there's so many different ports here. It's really, really nice to be able to connect to a secondary monitor or, you know, just plug in all sorts of things. So there you go, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the review and the demo. Again, the brushes that I was using are from KyleBrushes.com. Definitely check that out as well because there's plenty of brushes that he actually just gives away for free. It's just unbelievable. And the mega pack that I was showing you with like 160 some odd plus brushes, that's only $15. So two big recommendations. One is the Vaio Z Canvas and the other is Kyle's brushes. So I hope you liked the video. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see any more or what you would like to see in the future. As for now, take care everybody, and I hope to see you guys later. Now, as always, if this video has helped you, spread it around with your friends, share it on your social media, things like that. Alright everyone, so if you like the video, you want to learn more, you want to improve as an artist, highly recommend clicking over to Schoolism, signing up for the newsletter, because in this newsletter, you will always get free videos and tutorials and news about Schoolism so you can keep up to date with what's going on in the world. Click over now, and I'll see you guys next time.